Hello and welcome everyone to today's presentation. I'm Karen Storwick, the Vice President and Director of Communications for ROUSI, the Royal Alberta United Services Institute. For those of you who are unfamiliar with ROUSI, we're a Canadian-based forum for discussions on trending topics as they relate to global security and defense. Our history dates back to 1920 when ROUSI began as a think tank and then evolved into a service organization for veterans in the decades following the World Wars. And ROUSI has evolved back into a think tank, publishing original articles, generating discussion on social media platforms, and hosting a speaker series to amplify discussion on security and defense. And today we're hosting Dimitar Atanasov from the University of Lisbon as a part of our briefing room series, where we encourage young academics and intellects to present their research on topics related to security and defense. Dimitar will speak for about 15 minutes. Please keep your mics muted throughout the call. There will be a Q&A following Dimitar's presentation, where we encourage thoughtful, respectful participation, and you can type your questions into the chat sidebar. We'll be monitoring throughout, and we'll bring forward as many questions from the chat bar as we can. And I'll now turn the floor over to Joe Howard, President of ROUSI, to introduce Dimitar.
Thanks, Karen. As Karen mentioned, Dimitar is a doctoral candidate at the Dimitar, correct me if I'm wrong, Centro de Estudios Internacionales at the University of Lisbon. This follows your career, which includes in part working in the political department at the Embassy of Bulgaria in Lisbon. Dimitar's presentation today is entitled Securitizing Much? The EU and NATO, who has the main role in ensuring energy security in Europe? Instances of securitization of energy security on the part of the EU and NATO between 2022 and 2024. Before we start, Dimitar, this is a fascinating topic for any number of reasons, one of which it feeds into the recent series of seminars that fireside chats that ROUSI has had concerning, among others, the relationship between the EU and NATO, who does what and who can do what. So it's timely, very timely, that you should come forward with this topic. We understand that you've got maybe about 15 minutes or so to make your pitch, following which there are questions. And on that note, Dimitar, the floor is yours.
Joe, Karen, thanks so much for the presentation. I just wanted to say, Joe, that I was doing an internship in the embassy. At the embassy, I wasn't working there. But thank you so much. Anyways, so yeah, well, let me just share the screen. Good evening for me, everyone. And thank you so much for being here. So I'm going to present my work, my article, which is a working paper. It's currently in review. Actually, it was given back to me by the reviewers. I corrected it, my paper, using their comments, and now I've given it back. So I'm just waiting for the final response, like the final decision of the journal. But yes, this is my paper called Securitizing Much, a comparative analysis of how the EU and NATO differ in their institutional securitization of energy security from the period of 2022 to 2024. So in my work, I explore how those two organizations, the EU and NATO, have differently framed and elevated energy security to the level of an existential security issue. During one of the most turbulent periods in recent European history, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that happened on the 24th of February, 2022. Energy security didn't start with this war, like the problem with energy security did not start with this war, but the invasion combined with deliberate disruptions, like the pipeline sabotage turned into Nord Stream 1 and 2, turned into a frontline geopolitical crisis. So let's get started. Okay, yeah. The backdrop to everything is the dramatic escalation of energy security concerns triggered by Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Energy security, or like security of supply, if you need, there's like a bit of In academia, there's a bit of a talk about what it should be like. The terminology is a bit unclear, but in my work, I call it energy security, has been on the EU's radar for over a decade. But its importance skyrocketed with the mid-2000s ascension of former Eastern Bloc countries to NATO, which brought new vulnerabilities into the alliance strategic thinking. In the article, I'm talking about Poland specifically, and the Baltics, but specifically Poland because it was really dependent on Russian energy supplies, okay? So then came the major geopolitical shifts. Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea already raised alarms, but the 2022 invasion changed absolutely everything. It was followed by partial cutoffs of Russian gas to several EU countries. Bulgaria, my country, is one of them. Poland was the other one. The dramatic explosions of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines in September 2022. And in 2023, the deliberate damage to the underwater gas pipeline and communications cable between Finland and Estonia in the Baltics. So in the Baltic Sea, I'm sorry. So these weren't just accidents, though. They were kinetic attacks on critical energy infrastructure, making the vulnerability of Europe's energy system painfully clear, and pushing both organizations to treat energy as a core security matter, let's say. So the main research question I address in my paper is how do the European Union and NATO differ in their institutional securitization of energy security during the period of 2022 to 2024? To investigate this, I adopted a qualitative case study approach with the EU and NATO as the two parallel cases. The core method that I use is qualitative discourse analysis, closely examining official language in primary sources like strategies, communiques, speeches, declarations, press releases, and etc. I supplemented this with secondary academic literature. Everything is analyzed chronologically to trace how the framing of energy as a threat evolved month by month in response to unfolding events. This is again the research question and the methodology. Now I will have to get through really quick securitization theory, the lenses through which I look at what am I investigating, of course, because this is important, and I will explain it really fast. And it's pretty easy to understand after. It's pretty easy to understand. So again, my analysis rests upon it, and it was developed by the Copenhagen School in the 1980s and 1990s. I am aware it is an older theory, but I've seen recently in the last 4 or 5 years that people start using it again more and more. It was developed by scholars like Ole Wever, Barry Buzan, and Jab de Wilde. So at its heart, securitization is a speech act. A powerful actor presents an issue as an existential threat to a valued referent object, like the survival of society, for example, economy or state, etc., thereby legitimizing urgent, exceptional measures that go beyond normal political procedures. The key markers I looked for include repeated emphasis on urgency and emergency, descriptions of vulnerability, language of existential risk, and calls for extraordinary responses. In the energy context, this means framing dependence on Russian supplies, pipeline sabotage, or price shocks not just as economic problems, but as direct threats to national and collective security. Importantly, I focused on institutional discourse, statements from actors officially authorized to speak on behalf of NATO and the EU. Of course, I'm not going to go through everything like in super detail, but in the empirical part of my paper, I hope it comes out and I can share it with Rousey as soon as possible. Everything is there. It's in detail. But now I'm just gonna jump to the EU securitization, the part of the EU securitization, and after that, I'm going to NATO's one. We're looking at the EU first, where securitization happened quickly and comprehensively. Immediately after February 2022, when the invasion happened, EU leaders described that invasion as the continent's greatest challenge since World War II, exposing decades of dangerous dependence on Russian fossil fuels and energy. Just 1 month later, in March 2022, the strategic compass was released. That's a funny story. Actually, it was supposed to be released in end of February, but I remember I was in class actually when everything happened, when they released the compass in March. So we were waiting in February because I was in my favorite class, which was Europe as a global actor. But nothing happened, and we were wondering why. And then the invasion happened, and then I remember that I was in the same class again a month later, and the compass dropped, as we said in class, and we were really interested. We opened it up; it was really interesting. So it was rewritten in just 1 month because of the invasion. The compass calls the moment a geopolitical awakening for Europe and explicitly labeled Russian energy supplies as a political weapon, a tool of hybrid warfare comparable to tanks and soldiers. In May 2022, but I'm gonna, yes. So in May 2022, the Commission launched the Repower EU plan. I'm gonna stop on it later, but for now, I just want you to know that it was a massive 210 billion euro strategy to cut Russian fossil fuel dependence before 2020 through energy savings, diversification, clean transition acceleration, and reforms. Later, we are going to talk about this because there are a lot of critiques because of real life, because of this plan. Then came the September 2022 Nord Stream sabotage, described by President von der Leyen as sabotage requiring the strongest possible response. By the way, in academia, when I use this term, my supervisor, for example, was telling me, oh, don't use the word sabotage because maybe it looks like you're pointing fingers. It's not my words. It's the president of the commission's words. So yeah, that's why I'm just wanted to clarify this. It was a sabotage. So this pattern continued. The 2023 Critical Entities Resilience Directive, reactions to the Finland-Estonia pipeline damage, repeated condemnations of energy blackmail, and ongoing framing of Russian actions as coercion and a weapon. Now, let's really quick stop on the Repower EU plan, because it deserves special attention as the EU's most concrete and ambitious securitized response. The plan only admits hate and energy security concerns caused by the war and high prices. It warns of potential severe supply disruptions if storage isn't filled urgently. Its four cornerstones, which are saving energy, diversifying supplies, accelerating clear energy transitions, and combining investments and reforms, are presented as immediate necessities. The document stresses, and I said, the time to reduce Europe's energy dependence is now. Linking diversification to both climate and stopping the flow of blood money to Russia through fossil fuel purchases. So I'm getting to NATO's securitization of energy security now, which is more, I understand that it's more interesting for you and for your audience. So NATO's securitization followed a similar timeline, but with a distinct flavor, like distinct nuances. It was more military oriented. From day one in 2022, NATO condemned the invasion in the strongest terms, activated defense plans, and deployed elements of the NATO response force. The landmark document was the new strategic concept adopted in the Madrid summit in June 2022. For the first time, it named Russia the most significant and direct threat to Euro-Atlantic security and explicitly included manipulation of energy supplies as part of coercive hybrid tactics by authoritarian actors. After the Nord Stream explosions, NATO expressed deep concern and pledged a united and determined response to any deliberate attack on critical infrastructure, even hinting at potential Article 5 implications. By 2023 and 2024, the focus intensified on critical underwater infrastructure protection, leading to the creation of the critical undersea infrastructure network and constant reaffirmation of resilience against hybrid threats. So I want to stop on the strategic concept. Because it really is the cornerstone of NATO's approach. It outlines four core tasks: deterrence and defense, crisis prevention and management, cooperative security, and crucially, strengthening national and collective resilience of the allies. Energy security is woven in as something the alliance must protect against coercive use, including investment in stable and reliable supplies, especially to support military operations. Here, this is the nuance here. Unlike the EU, NATO rarely mentions impacts on civilian populations or long-term economic independence. The lens is much more about implications for collective defense and military readiness. So, how do these organizations compare? The EU treats energy security as a broad, multi-sectoral challenge, deeply intertwined with economic stability, societal resilience, the green transitions, and long-term strategic autonomy from any single supplier. NATO, on the other hand, frames it primarily through resilience in critical infrastructure protection, especially underwater assets with clear links to military readiness, deterrence, and collective defense obligations. Both organizations undeniably securitized energy, presenting it as an existential security issue requiring extraordinary attention. But their institutional mandates and historical roles produce noticeably divergent discourses and policy emphasis. To conclude, throughout 2022 to 2024, both the EU and NATO clearly framed energy security as a top-tier security concern in response to Russia's war and related disruptions. Yet their securitization practices diverged in important ways. The EU portrayed energy security as a comprehensive, cross-cutting issue demanding economic, environmental, and geopolitical solutions. NATO, meanwhile, emphasized resilience of critical infrastructure protection against hybrid coercion and the implications for military defense and alliance cohesion. This variation highlights how the same external shock, which was the war in Ukraine, can lead to different securitization patterns across international organizations shaped by their unique mandates, audiences, and capabilities. It also opens the door for future research on how these differences influence cooperation on overlap in safeguarding Europe's energy infrastructure, about which I wrote actually an article. I have it published. So yes, this was the presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. I think I'm on time, exactly 15 minutes. So thank you so much, everyone. I'm open to questions and to a discussion. Thank you.
Dimitar, thank you very much. A great presentation, and you've identified two different approaches. I would like to ask you the question, what is the nature of the discourse between NATO and the EU? We have two international treaty regimes. The EU works on diversification, market and infrastructure, and long-term transition. NATO is concerned with critical infrastructure protection and military readiness. Was this a stovepipe approach where each regime remained within its own orbit, or was there a lot of discourse between the two so that Europe-wide there was one solution? Can you speak to the nature of the relationship and the cooperation or lack of cooperation between these two separate international treaty regimes, please?
Thank you so much, Joe, for this really good question, because I looked at this problem in my other article, which is about the overlap between the two organizations in the defense of critical infrastructure. So in Europe, yes, they do overlap, and as I called my article, the title of the article is "Too Many Cooks in the Kitchen." There is no clear division of labor during the period that I analyzed. I'm not talking about right now, but there isn't much progress from what I'm following. There wasn't a clear division of labor between who does what. So there was this clear shock for everyone in Europe. I'm talking clearly about Europe. I'm not talking about the US and Canada. So everybody, I don't want to say entered into a panic mode and started producing these documents and declarations and speeches, but nobody knew exactly what was supposed to happen. And in September 2022, when the biggest energy sabotage happened ever in human history. Nobody has seen such a huge sabotage as the pipelines. NATO entered much more into the picture, and it created even more confusion. I wrote about all of this in my article, but in 2023, this problem was identified, and Stoltenberg and the previous head of NATO, Stoltenberg and von der Leyen created the task force, the EU-NATO task force for cooperation, and one of their core tasks, it was in July 2023, one of their core tasks were more cooperation on energy security and infrastructure protection. The problem is that they were only talking about it. It had only one report. It hasn't been developed since, from what I followed, and I do follow it. I haven't seen any development on it. Maybe it is because Mark Rutte came into the picture. Maybe it's because Donald Trump came into the picture. Maybe they since Nord Stream was already blown up, and it came out right after the pipelines, the cable sabotage as well in between Finland and Estonia. I don't know what happened, but it was only talk. But thank God. So that's a really, I'm trying to give a critique about it because not much work is done. And I really think the EU should be more responsible about it. But NATO, at the same time, especially right now with President Trump, maybe will pull back and leave the EU and its institutions and experts do its job. I have no idea. But until the period that I examined, I think there was a huge confusion and nobody knew what they were doing.
Thank you. I will now ask one question to which I want a one-word answer, and then I'll turn the floor over to Quentin Ennis. Was there a competition between the EU and NATO to assume responsibility for sorting this out? Yes or no?
No.
Thank you. Quentin, the floor is yours.
All right, Joe, thanks for that, the handoff. Dimitar, can you expand on Joe's question a little bit more? I think that we're kind of hitting at the heart of it here with the distinction between Article 4, Article 5. What the Russians are doing is playing in that gray zone. I don't know if that term is used in Europe anymore, but in that gray zone between Article 4 and Article 5. And Article 4, when it talks about security, it just says security. It doesn't talk about economic or energy security. It doesn't define security any more than military security. So if you can just expand on Joe's question a bit.
Thank you, Quentin. I just want to say that we're talking about kinetic attacks here. From what I read when I was doing the research, from what I read from all the academic works, from all the statements of the stakeholders from the EU and from NATO, and from, by the way, interviews that I saw and that I cited, nobody was willing to implement neither Article 5 nor Article 4 only because of economic coercion. We imagine this. They could have done this because in a case that, for example, in April 2022, Russia stopped giving gas to Bulgaria, stopped the flows of gas to Bulgaria, to my country. I remember it really well. Nobody moved a finger, and nobody should have, because this is not a kinetic attack. This is how I understand it and how I see it. But in the Madrid Summit Declaration, in the strategic concept, it was hinted that if a kinetic attack was identified by if a single actor was identified as the one that made a kinetic attack on Europe's critical infrastructure, that is an Article 5 reason for implementing Article 5 to protect the country that where this is happening, let's say. This is what I know, having in mind all that I've researched. But again, we're talking about kinetic attacks. Nobody will implement Article 5 because I stopped the gas. This doesn't. Nobody is even hinting at that. yes, we have those sanctions. Yes, we have more cooperation between the actors. We're talking about the EU and NATO. Yes, we support countries like on the eastern flank, let's say Poland and Bulgaria specifically, especially Poland, but nobody, no.
Okay. So this part of this is a question of language. So the North Atlantic Treaty has been interpreted as referring to kinetic attacks and not to non-kinetic attacks. Is that your contention here?
Yes, exactly more to kinetic attacks.
Yeah. So Joe wrote some stuff in the last Rousey dispatches about shifting the language to shift from the idea of an attack to the idea of a threat. And that threat is sort of broader language and it could be interpreted more broadly. Okay, so what's your thoughts on that? Do you think NATO and the EU have to do some talking about what the North Atlantic Charter and Article 4 and Article 5 actually say?
I think they should. I think there should be clear division of mandates on this because the EU, I can't cite it, but the EU has its own something like Article 5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's a softer version. Yeah, Joe, please.
It's the Treaty on European Article 42 sub 7, which refers to armed aggression, whereas Article 5 refers to armed attack. But we'll be here all day defining what they are, and we'll never come up with a conclusion. But if we were to borrow from the UN Charter and refer to threat or use of force, it simplifies the dialogue, and it also brings the two international treaty regimes just a little bit closer to talking the same language. Thanks, Quentin.
Yeah. Okay, so that's one way ahead, right? Sorting out the language and things like that. Now, there's other things that we can do here. We can start using other means to stabilize Europe.
So there's a lot to unpack here because right now, as we can see, the Euro-Atlantic relation, the transatlantic relations is suffering a lot. It is in a big crisis. From what I can say, I can't say much about Canada, but from what I can remember, like it was a few months ago, I think, like around 4 months ago, when head of the Commission von der Leyen signed a trade deal with the president of the United States, where if I don't want to cite like exact numbers, but like around like 400 billion. We promised to buy 400 billion euros of energy from the LNG from the United States, and it's LNG, liquefied natural gas. So I really don't think there will be any changes. After we sign this, we will continue buying energy from the United States for really high prices. I'm not going to lie. It is obvious. Nobody's hiding that the Russian energy resources were cheaper, but we were too dependent on them, and now these resources are not acceptable from a political and ideological stance. But I don't think we will stop buying energy from the United States, and the United States will stop selling this energy, and like how you called it, the energy corridor will cease to function, because everybody has an interest on that, especially the US, since we're buying on much cheaper prices than we should. So I don't think Greenland and whatever will have an impact on that, because without the United States, there is one simple thing to understand here in the United States, in the European Union, from how I see and from what I've read. Of course, maybe someone will correct me on that. Without the United States, the EU cannot. The EU cannot function without the United States energy, because we don't have where to get that much energy from, especially the LNG. So this has to be understood. And whatever happens with Greenland, whatever happens, we must continue buying from the US. Somebody may say that we were dependent on Russia and now we're dependent on the US. That's a Quentin, I see that you may have something to say, but that's a really big conversation. But yes, I think I hope I made myself clear that there will be no difference, and the energy corridor from the US will not stop, whatever happens. I mean, you understand.
And I think there's a kind of a follow-on question, really, which is, yeah, the U.S. is important for European energy security. Is Canada a viable option in your mind?
That's a question in the chat, right?
Yeah.
Can I just read it real quick?
Yep.
I'm not really big into Canada's internal and external politics, but from what I know, the EU is trying to diversify its market a lot. I don't know if you've heard, but like 2 days ago, we signed the really big Mercosur deal. We're talking about agriculture, we're talking about food products, we're talking about many things. And I think the EU will continue trying to diversify as much as humanly possible in other sectors as well. And one of these sectors will be energy. And I think if we don't already have some kind of a deal with Canada, we will walk in that direction. In just a second. I don't think there will be a problem between Canada and the EU because of the US. I really don't think so. It's in the more of in the EU's interest, and whatever happens, again, we need Canada and the US, and I don't think there will be any problems with this. But again, we need to diversify more. We are diversifying more. It's just not enough for now. And just to go back to my presentation, the Repower EU plan. From what I see, I'm not going to say it's failing because that's a really big statement, and I'm no one to make such big statements. But I think it's lacking a lot. Until we cannot diversify away from Russian energy until 2030. This is it was a really big statement, and I cited a few in the empirical part of my research. I cited a few authors immediately being critical of it after it came out. It was obvious from the beginning that there are big chasms of logic in it, let's say, and these authors that I cited were proven right. We cannot, but the biggest thing is that we cannot cut off energy supplies from Russia until 2030, and that's a proof because like we've had so many reports of on France and Italy importing even more Russian energy than last year. So, yes.
So there's a convergence of interest here. Then Canada's trying to diversify away from exporting solely to the United States. Europe is trying to find other sources. So there's a convergence of interest there, I think, between Canada and the US. And I think that's what we need to get at here. I'm going to pass the floor to Scott. Scott's going to talk about other alternatives, like the Gulf states and perhaps Israel. Go ahead, Scott.
So, hello. I was just very good talk. Thank you very much. I was just when we were talking about diversifying the EU energy sources, how much does the Gulf in particular contribute to the EU? I know they're importing more natural gas, liquefied. How much does that factor into the energy diversification now that they're trying to run down Russian energy? American energy is seeming a little bit more want to diversify or hedge that bet in the coming years. How much is the Gulf dependent?
How much is the what dependent? I'm sorry?
Of the Gulf states.
The Gulf states. That's really interesting because we're getting a lot of LNG from Qatar as well, and from Azerbaijan. I know Azerbaijan is not at the Gulf, but especially from what I researched last, we're getting more and more deals from Qatar, and there were even talks of a pipeline that goes through Syria, then Turkey. And since Turkey is now such a huge gas hub, because South Stream, Turkey Stream, that goes from Russia now goes to Turkey, I've heard voices and I've read like op-eds that this is more and more plausible, especially with the new government, if we can call it that, in Syria. But from what I know, Qatar and a lot of LNG. It actually the boats, the ships of energy, the tankers, right? That's how they're called, tankers. They go to Alexandroupoli in Greece, which is next to Bulgaria, which is not far away from my hometown, by the way, in Bulgaria. So that's how I know it. It's like a local thing. We have a lot of Qatari because it goes from Alexandroupoli, it goes to Bulgaria because we buy from Qatar as well. So yeah, only from Qatar, from what I know. Thank you so much, Scott, for the question.
But then, as a follow-up, then the security issue would be then issues with the Red Sea, going through the Suez Canal. Qatar doesn't have a direct line through the Gulf, through there is no direct pipeline from Qatar to the EU right now, correct?
Yeah, there isn't.
So you're stuck with shipping, and then there's discussions about pipelines perhaps going through Syria. Exactly. There's also that LNG or natural gas field that's been found out by off the coast of Israel. Okay, Scott, does that answer your question?
It's all good.
It does, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else out there?
I did have a question, Dimitar. I wanted to know, in Canada, I think we have a problem with a lot of our general public kind of head in the sands when it comes to security. And I was wondering what your experience is in Europe, if you find that the general public are interested in energy security, if they're willing to make the sacrifices that that would be necessary to cut ties with Russia, or if it's if there's more of a kind of a head in the sand approach that their needs today are more important than their needs tomorrow.
Aaron, thanks so much for the question, and you hit the nail right on the head in your setting the stage for a huge discussion. So we talk a lot exactly about this here in Europe, and I've been to conferences, academic conferences, to seminars, to summer schools. It's really complicated. So right now I'm in Portugal, and here I will be absolutely honest. For them, if we cut Russian energy supplies tomorrow for 100%, they wouldn't care. They just wouldn't, because they get all their energy, gas from Algeria, and I think from Morocco or something. But like, especially from Algeria, they just do not care. But the problem is Eastern Europe. And not only, by the way, because like the pipelines from Russia go to Italy. So it's not only Eastern Europe. So Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, and Bulgaria have big problems with that, because we've been dependent on the pipelines for a long time. And the biggest problem is Germany as well, because we see this every day, without the pipelines and without the Russian cheap energy, they're in a recession for a third year already. They have high inflation. They're deindustrializing. It's because of energy. Everybody admits it. So it's a really, really big discussion here in Europe. And everybody's talking about, yeah, we're going to do it, but not really, because we have our own interests. We don't want our factories to close. So it's a really big unresolved issue. From Brussels, from the Commission, we hear all the time yes, we're doing it, but at the same time, like even Belgium buys a lot of Russian energy, so like oil, by the way. So I cannot give you a clear answer to that, Karen, for which I apologize, but it's a really big discussion right now, and I do not think, but you know what, I said I cannot answer the question, but I will. I do not think we're capable of doing that, because at this point, we're going to sacrifice way too much, and we see it every day. Because like the prices are rising, even in Portugal, by the way, but especially in Bulgaria, the prices are rising. The heating at home is around 60% more expensive since 2022 at home. 60%. These are crazy numbers. My grandparents they buy gas in a bottle for cooking. It's like 40% more expensive since 2022. So, but
I
they don't feel
understand
that in Portugal.
it's kind of
Yes.
natural for human beings to be concerned about their own personal security versus national
This is the
security.
security we're talking about. Exactly.
Yeah.
This is the security. They're not afraid. We're not afraid of bombs and missiles. And no. We're afraid of high prices because we don't have gas. That's
I've
how
had
we
some
are in Bulgaria.
conversations myself with some Europeans. The Europeans that I was surprised actually that they could actually justify the war between Russia and Ukraine. Because it helps them feel better about their position of not wanting to make sacrifices, and so I think they'd rather it was somebody else's war, somebody else's problem. Let's not get too crazy here and talk about cutting off our own supplies.
Everybody's following their interests. It may be difficult to understand in Canada because you're on the other side, but here it's we feel it every day. Everybody's following, and I cannot judge anyone personally. Like reality has its own laws. Let's say.
It's complex. Thank you, Dimitar.
Thank you so much, Karen, for the
back
question.
to you, Quentin.
So, Dimitar, we're approaching the top of the hour here. I'm going to ask one more question, which is really about diversifying. So we've talked about LNG a lot. We've talked about gas a lot. Gasoline or petrol. What's your thoughts on alternatives like nuclear energy, wind, solar, geothermal? Did you get any feel for where the EU is on that?
I can give you a real quick answer for that. 2 days ago, the German chancellor said that closing the nuclear power plants in Germany was a big strategic mistake. These are not my words.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm citing word by word, by the way. In Bulgaria, we are feeling the problems because we have one in Bulgaria. I'm talking about my own country. We are feeling the problems because we have only one nuclear power plant, which was serviced by Russia.
Mm.
Russia stopped servicing it. So now an American company called Westinghouse is serving it, and from servicing. I think it's called servicing. Yeah, whatever it. And it's as on the LNG from the US to Europe, it's much more expensive. Nuclear energy, a biased opinion. Maybe nuclear energy is great. It's not a coincidence that France is keeping their nuclear facilities. And I think more of that is better because it's much cleaner. So that's about nuclear energy. And about the wind and the solar, it's not enough. We have those plans, the Repower EU and the strategic compass. And we're talking about it all the time, especially the Repower. It's not enough. From what I've seen, from what I've read until now, it's just not. Poland opened a few coal mines. Germany, by the way. So it was a bit ironic. They're closing their nuclear facilities, but they're opening coal mines. So make of that what you will. But I think there's one. Theo is having a question as well. I'm just saying.
First of all, thanks for your presentation. I think the two key elements stick out very clearly. And one is that energy is being used as a weapon by every power.
It is.
Whether it's Russia, China, or the United States. Every power who has energy assets will use it as a weapon. And therefore, the need, and you called upon it as well, for diversification is paramount. Especially in Europe, if you want to reduce dependence clearly from Russia, but in the future also from the States, we need to diversify. And that's, for example, in the Netherlands, where I'm from, this is clearly a strategic option now to not only go back to nuclear, also use solar, use wind, but that's not a holy grail. We'll still need the LNG from Qatar, for example. We import a lot from the States. And that's what I think is, whether we like it or not, we're still in a period of strategic dependence for the coming years before we have fixed this problem. And I think you will also see an approach where countries in Europe are not relying on one supplier, e.g. the United States alone. What's happening now with Greenland has a profound impact in Europe. And that clearly puts the American guarantees in a different light. So every country, every bloc is starting to search elsewhere in the world to secure its energy. Like I said, and I think that it's good. And that's also with the paper that we realize that, like I said, it's being used as a weapon. It is we call it a weakness we have for the moment. It's not fixed next year. So we better navigate wisely around it in order to gather things together. And it's not only the oil or the gas. I mean, look at, for example, rare earth materials. Europe is for 93% dependent on China for its rare earth materials for the iPhones, etc. And yes, if we have to pay higher prices, like you said, hey, your grandfathers, with the gas, that's the consequence of being energy dependent. And if in ultimo we need to be challenged on that, then I also will see whether our population is ready to do it for its own future. But we're stuck with a problem at nil. It's in a place where we don't want it, but we have to accept it for the coming years, and we better get all our asses off the chairs and fix it as soon as possible. But we have to be realistic that it takes us still a couple of years before we have really fixed this problem. If we ever gonna fix it, that's the other question. Thanks. But once again, thanks for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Theo. So, in my opinion, I just want to say that this is a strategic and fatal weakness. We just don't have resources.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have Siberia. Yeah, we don't have like what Texas and Nevada, where the most like oil is produced, like or something like that. We don't have like exactly the rare earths that China has because we just don't have territory. So, in my opinion, we have to do more quality than quantity. We have to compensate with, I don't know, maybe research. That's the problem here, right? We have to compensate with something to show how competitive we are and that we can be competitive. I understand you, and I totally agree with you. It's a fatal weakness. We are very dependent. We're always dependent. And if we don't find a way to show what we can put on the table in the international sphere, we will be always dependent, which is really fatal. I'm sharing your opinion on that 100%.
Yeah. Once again, thanks, Dimitar.
Thanks so much.
Anybody else out there? Dimitar, I'm going to ask one last question, then I'm going to hand it back to Joe for a closeout. So, in your eyes, in your mind, after doing your research, going through all of the analysis of the language and the kind of proposals that are being made, do you think that part of this is a cognitive failure? That there's a failure of orientation on the part of the leadership in Europe and in the West to reorient themselves to the new problem and realize that the world has changed?
I wouldn't say so. The problem is everything about this is unprecedented. Europe was living in peace. We don't count 2014 because let's just not count 2014 for like a long time. We don't. Let's say back to the Yugoslav wars. We were living in peace. Everything was going well. Energy was flowing. We were producing. We were. The GDP was climbing. Everyone was happy. So such shocks, they are expected to send shockwaves through the political establishment of talking about the EU. NATO is a much larger picture, so I wouldn't comment because I don't know Canada. There is much to be desired about taking decisions, about reacting properly, but I do think we're on the right track as long as we listen to the voice of reason. Now, I sound like a politician right now, but like no, I really do think that if we listen to the voice of reason and we continue to be united, everything will be good enough. It won't be like before. Our GDPs in Europe will not climb like before. We won't have the same energy as before. We won't have the peace of before. But we are adapting. The political elites are adapting. But again, much to be desired. But I understand your question, but I wouldn't say cognitive dissonance. What did you say? I don't remember. But yeah,
cognitive failure. Yeah.
Yes, I won't say the cognitive failure, but there's much to be desired. Yeah.
So they are oriented to the
question.
problem. They acknowledge there's a problem. They're just not. They're working on solutions, but the solutions aren't here yet.
Exactly.
Okay. Dimitar, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm going to hand back to Joe to wrap up, and we'll go from there.
Thank you so much.
Quentin, thank you very much for the handoff. Dimitar, thank you for a riveting presentation. And thank you to those in the audience who have asked questions, including Theo. My invitation is to anybody who's under the age of 100 and is an aspiring scholar and would like to make a presentation on anything, please reach out to us and you will have the floor at the next briefing room. For those who are in attendance at the universities, would you please spread the word at the next time you're having a coffee or a beer with friends that Rousey is a very welcoming, friendly, and open-minded organization who will entertain presentations such as this on anything having to do with security and defense writ large. In the meantime, Rousey is going to be hosting its final security and defense presentation on national security strategy at the end of this month. And we are delighted to have as two of our speakers, Ms. Lieselot Egmond, who is a counselor at the Netherlands Permanent Mission in NATO. And she arrives courtesy of our friend and former presenter last November, Theo ten Haaf. Theo, thank you again for your help in arranging that. Our other guest speaker is Lieutenant General retired Dr. Andrei Falkowski, who has considerable experience at the military committees of both the EU and NATO. And together with the third speaker, with whom we're still negotiating, we'll be identifying how do these two international treaty regimes do whatever they do? And do they push down policy back to their member states, or is there pushback? What is the nature of the relationship between these two organizations? We don't know what it is, but we hope we shall find out later next week. In the meantime, thank you again for taking the time to spend with us today. We hope you'll spread the word, and we look forward to seeing you again late next week. And if you have any questions, reach out to me at president@rusi.org, and we'll take it from there. Have a great day.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for having me.
All right.